I became useful before I understood what useful meant. I don't say this as a complaint, not yet anyway. Children absorb the roles available to them the way they absorb language, without analysis, through repetition, through the slow accumulation of evidence about what produces warmth and what produces silence. By the time I was old enough to name the pattern, I was already so deep inside it that it felt like personality rather than circumstance. My name is Emily Parker. I am 35 years old. I have not always been good at asking for help. This is the story of why. My earliest clear memory of being the family problem solver involves a broken dryer and a Tuesday afternoon. I was 9. My mother was on the phone with her sister, a call she had been waiting for and did not want to interrupt. My brother Jake was 4, sitting in a basket of wet laundry in the kitchen, crying because the laundry was wet and he was bored, and 4-year-olds do not require complex justifications for distress. I remember standing in the doorway looking at the situation, my mother signaling urgently with one hand, Jake's face going red, and making a decision without understanding I was making one. I went and picked him up. I settled him on my hip, the way I'd seen my mother do. I walked him around the kitchen until he stopped crying. When my mother got off the phone 20 minutes later, she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. "You're such a good girl," she said. "You're the responsible one." I was 9, I glowed. That is the part that nobody tells you about the role of the family fixer. At first, it feels like love. The recognition, the specific warmth of being seen as capable, it fills something in you that doesn't yet know what it's being filled with. You don't understand, at 9, that praise for usefulness is different from praise for existence. You don't yet have the vocabulary to notice that you are consistently celebrated for what you do rather than who you are. The role expanded gradually, the way all things expand when they meet no resistance. By 12, I was the child my parents called when Jake needed watching, and they had somewhere to be. By 14, I was intermediary in arguments between my parents and my brother, the translator, the negotiator, the one who could be trusted to handle emotional situations without generating new ones. By 16, I had a part-time job and was quietly contributing to household expenses during the months when money was tight. A contribution my parents accepted naturally, as though it had always been part of the arrangement. Jake, at 13, broke a neighbor's window with a baseball, and my parents paid for the replacement, and apologized to the neighbor and bought Jake a new baseball to replace the one that had been confiscated. I mention this not because it was significant on its own, but because of what was happening simultaneously. I had saved $300 toward a school trip to Washington, D.C., and my parents had told me with genuine regret that there wasn't enough for the deposit right now. Could I wait a month? I waited, the month passed, the deposit deadline passed, I didn't go on the trip. The neighbor's window cost $240. I did not, at 16, connect these things. I told myself circumstances were complicated. I told myself my parents were doing their best. I was a child who had been told she was responsible, and I had taken the assignment seriously. The phrase lived in my family's vocabulary the way certain phrases do, worn smooth from use. Its original meaning partially eroded, functioning now as shorthand for a transaction that everyone understood. You're the responsible one. It was deployed during crises, primarily. When Jake needed something covered and I had the resources to cover it. When plans needed changing and the question was whose plans were changeable. When sacrifice was required and the family needed to determine who would provide it. The answer was always me, not because they didn't love Jake. I want to be clear about this, because the easy version of this story makes him a villain, and the truth is more uncomfortable than that. They loved Jake completely and without calculation. He was funny and charismatic, and his failures always arrived wrapped in circumstances. Bad luck, difficult timing, forces beyond his control. That made them seem like things that had happened to him rather than things he had done. My successes, by contrast, were evidence of my capability. My capabilities were evidence that I could handle things. My ability to handle things was evidence that I didn't need help. The logic was circular. It was also airtight. I graduated from university at 22 with a degree I had paid for myself through part-time work and careful budgeting. And my family came to the ceremony and took photographs, and my mother cried and my father said he was proud. It was a good day. I remember it as a good day. What I don't remember noting at the time was that 3 months earlier Jake had failed out of his first semester at community college, and my parents had paid his tuition back and spent the summer helping him decide what to try next. He tried several things over the years that followed. He tried a business that required startup capital and lasted 8 months. My parents contributed $4,000. He tried a lease on an apartment that turned out to be beyond his budget, and they covered his rent for a period that stretched from 2 months to 5. He had a car repossessed, and they bought him another one, used but functional, with money from an account my mother had referred to over the years as the Family Emergency Fund. I had never received anything from the Family Emergency Fund. I had contributed to it, indirectly, in the way that the person who never draws from the reserves contributes to their accumulation. The year Jake turned 28, he lost a job he'd held for 14 months, his longest run of consistent employment, and moved back into my parents' house. I was 31. I had a salary, a savings account, a small apartment I rented alone, and the quiet satisfaction of a life that had required enormous effort to construct, but now held its shape reliably. My parents called more often that year. The calls had a quality I recognized without immediately naming, a warmth that arrived early in the conversation and tapered toward a point. At the end of every call, there was a mention. Jake's situation, the difficulty of the month, the particular pressure of managing a household around an adult child who wasn't managing himself. I listened. I said the right things. Occasionally, I sent money, not enormous amounts, but consistent ones, the way responsible people manage ongoing costs. I told myself this was what family did. I was right in a limited sense. This was what my family did. The gambling started, I think, a year before I found out about it. That's the nature of things people hide. They're already underway by the time the information reaches you. Jake had always liked cards. I knew that. He played poker with friends, social games, nothing that seemed particularly alarming. What I didn't know, what my parents discovered before I did, and chose not to tell me, was that the social games had evolved into something else. Online platforms, larger stakes, the particular escalation of someone who has found a way to experience intensity and money at the same time. The debts accumulated the way debts do when there's no one applying friction, invisibly and then all at once. By the time I found out, the number was significant. Not catastrophic in isolation, perhaps, but catastrophic in the context of everything else. The apartment he couldn't afford, the job he hadn't found, the money my parents had already spent over 2 years of covering the baseline costs of his existence. I found out on a Sunday afternoon at my parents' house. I had come for dinner. My mother had cooked the meal she made for significant occasions, the one that required more preparation than usual, that signaled the evening had a purpose. I should have recognized the signal. I had been receiving it my whole life. After dinner, my father cleared his throat. "We need to talk about Jake's situation," he said. I looked at them. Jake was not there. I noticed this only in retrospect, the fact of his absence from a conversation about his crisis. My mother explained it in the careful way she had developed over years of presenting Jake's disasters. Sympathetically, with emphasis on the circumstances, with the particular framing that ensured the listener understood this was something that had happened to him rather than something he had done. By the time she finished, the amount was on the table, $42,000. I looked at the number, then I looked at my parents. "What are you asking me?" I said. My father looked at my mother. "We've already spoken to your brother," my mother said. "He's agreed to a repayment plan. We just need to cover the immediate debt before it goes to collections." She paused. "We thought with your savings." "You already agreed," I said. "We told him we'd handle it," my father said. "We thought. You told him you'd handle it with my money." "Emily," my mother's voice careful now. "We know this is a lot to ask, but it's family money." "It's my money," I said. "I earned it. It's in my account. It has my name on it." "Your brother is in serious trouble." "My brother is always in serious trouble." "Emily, has he ever once?" I stopped. I started again. "Has there been a single time in the last 10 years when Jake created a problem that I wasn't the solution to?" The silence that followed was not the silence of people considering the question. It was the silence of people waiting for it to pass. "It's family," my mother said. "Family helps family." I looked at her across the dinner table, the table where I had eaten hundreds of meals, at which I had negotiated and smoothed and absorbed and contributed, and been called responsible so many times the word had started to sound like a cage I had voluntarily entered, and then forgotten how to leave. "No," I said. My mother blinked. "No," I said again. "I'm not doing it." The room did not erupt. That's the thing about the Parkers. We are not a family that erupts. We manage. We apply pressure in the careful, calibrated way of people who have learned that sustained pressure works better than sudden force. What followed was several hours of it. My father used the word *reasonable* 14 times. I counted, because counting gave me something to do that wasn't breaking. My mother returned repeatedly to Jake's circumstances, to the particular fragility she had always attributed to him, to the dangers of what might happen if the debt wasn't handled. Extended family was invoked. Our grandmother, who had died 3 years earlier and could not confirm or deny having had opinions about any of this, was invoked. The concept of family, what it meant, what it required, what a person revealed about their character by how they responded to its demands, was invoked so many times it lost its shape entirely. Nobody said, "We should not have agreed on your behalf without asking you." Nobody said, "Jake should not have accumulated this debt." Nobody said, "You have given enough." What they said, ultimately, through various formulations and with increasing directness, was, "You will do this because that is who you are." What my mother said at 11:15 on a Sunday night, when it was clear that I was not going to agree. "If you walk away from this, don't come back." I had been afraid of that sentence my entire life. I had structured my behavior around never hearing it. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father. I looked at the remnants of the dinner she had cooked, and the way the kitchen light made the room look warm in a way that didn't reach whatever was happening in the center of it. "Okay," I said, and I left. I drove home. I sat in my car in the parking garage for about 20 minutes. Then I went upstairs, opened my phone's contact list, and began the process of removing my family from accessible reach. I blocked their numbers. I blocked their email addresses. I removed their accounts from the social media I used. I did this carefully and completely, the way I did most things, thoroughly, without leaving exceptions that might constitute a back door. I cried while I was doing it, not dramatically, just steadily, for a while, the way you cry when you're doing something that costs you something real. Then I went to bed. The first month was the hardest. The silence had a physical quality, a presence, paradoxically, in the space where their voices usually were. My phone, which had always had their names scattered through its notifications, was quiet in a way I had never experienced as an adult. I kept reaching for things that weren't there. The Sunday call, the midweek check-in, the particular rhythms of contact that had structured my weeks for 30 years. My birthday arrived 6 weeks after I left. I spent it with my friend Nadia, who took me to dinner and gave me a book I'd mentioned wanting and sang happy birthday in a restaurant without any irony. And it was a genuinely good evening. Nobody from my family called. I had blocked their numbers, which meant they couldn't. But I had expected something, a letter, an email to an address I hadn't thought to block, a message through someone who knew both of us. Nothing. The nothing told me something. I wasn't sure yet what to do with it. Christmas was harder. I had a plan for Christmas, friends, a trip, deliberate occupation, and the plan worked well enough. But there were moments in December when the holiday's particular gravity pulled at something in me that planning didn't fully reach. The specific images of Christmases inside my family, my mother's kitchen in the morning, the smell of whatever she had been cooking, my father's particular ritual of reading the paper before allowing the day to begin. These were not abstract memories. They were sensory and immediate, and I felt them with a precision that surprised me. I missed the family I wished I'd had. That is not the same as missing the family I had. But from the inside in December, the distinction was sometimes hard to hold. I went to therapy in January. I had always considered therapy in the casual, perpetually deferred way of someone who believes their problems are not quite significant enough to justify the appointment. What happened with my family apparently reached the threshold. My therapist was a woman named Dr. Okafor who had the particular quality of asking questions that seemed simple until you started answering them. In our second session, she asked me to describe a typical week before I left my family. I described it. She was quiet for a moment. "How much of your mental and financial energy," she said, "was being directed toward your family's needs versus your own?" I had never measured it. I had never thought to. I began calculating it there in her office, and the number I arrived at was one I spent the following week sitting with. The things that changed in the year that followed would seem mundane, itemized separately. I was promoted in March into a role I had been quietly ready for but had lacked the bandwidth to pursue actively. The bandwidth had been occupied, it turned out, with things that were no longer occupying it. I began spending time with people who had no relationship to my family's dynamics and found that social interaction, without the underlying calculation of who needed what and whether I had it to give, felt different. lighter, more actual. I signed up for a pottery class, which I had always wanted to do and which served no purpose except the experience of making something with my hands that had no audience and no function and no relationship to anyone's needs but my own. I was not very good at pottery. I went every Thursday for 8 months. I ran into a man named Daniel at a friend's dinner party in April, and we started seeing each other, slowly and then less slowly. And what I found was that without the static of my family's ongoing emergency, I could be present in a relationship in a way I hadn't been before. Not perfectly, but genuinely. This was new. By the end of the first year, I had begun to feel something I could only describe as rested. Not happy in a simple way, I was not operating on the principle of simple happiness, which has always seemed to me a slightly suspicious concept, but stable. In possession of my own energy in a way I couldn't remember experiencing before. Peace felt strange at first. I want to be honest about this. I had spent so long living inside the particular agitation of a family, always in crisis, that its absence registered not as relief, but as wrongness, a tinnitus of low-level guilt, a waiting for something that didn't arrive. I was so accustomed to being needed that not being needed felt like failure rather than freedom. It took time to recalibrate, but it did recalibrate. By the second year, peace had started to feel like mine. Then my phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a report I was reviewing, the ordinary afternoon of a life that had acquired, quietly and incrementally, a shape I was comfortable inside. My phone lit up on the table beside the report. Mom. The name sat on the screen and my body produced, immediately and without my permission, a complex chemical response. Something that was not quite fear and not quite longing and not quite anger, but contained evidence of all three. For one stupid second, I thought she might be calling to say she missed me. I answered, "Emily." Her voice had a quality I didn't immediately recognize, something softer than her usual register, or something performing softness. I couldn't yet tell which. "Mom," I said. A pause, long enough that I understood she was calibrating something. "It's so good to hear your voice," she said. I waited. "I've been thinking about you. I hope you know that." Another pause. "We've all been thinking about you." "Okay," I said. "I know," she stopped, started again. "I know things were difficult before. I want you to know that I understand why you needed space." The word asterisk space landed with an interesting weight. 2 years, blocked numbers, a Christmas I spent in another city specifically to avoid the gravitational pull of a holiday I associated with her kitchen. This was the word she had chosen, space. "We've all done a lot of reflecting," she said. "I'd love to see you if you're open to it. Just coffee or dinner somewhere neutral. She paused in a way that sounded effortful. "I miss my daughter." In that moment I felt it. I want to be honest about this because dishonesty here would make me more sympathetic and less true. I felt the pull, the specific emotional force of a mother's voice saying I miss my daughter asterisk after 2 years of silence. I felt it land in the place where that statement was always going to land. I said I would think about it. I called Nadia that evening. "She said she misses you," Nadia said. "Yes. Do you believe her?" I sat with this. "I don't know," I said. "What does your body say?" "My body says to be careful." "Your body," Nadia said, "is extremely smart." We met at a restaurant, neutral ground, my suggestion. A place with no Parker family associations. My mother arrived first and was sitting in a booth when I came in. And for a moment, seeing her across the room, I felt the simple, uncomplicated fact of her. My mother, 63, in a coat I recognized, looking at her phone with the expression she wore when she was pretending to be occupied. She stood when she saw me. She hugged me. She smelled like the perfume she had always worn. We sat down. The first hour was disarming in a way I had half expected but still found difficult to maintain full distance from. She was warm. She asked about my life, the promotion, Daniel, the apartment I'd moved to after leaving the old one. She listened in the way she was capable of listening when she chose to, fully, responsively, with the attentiveness of a woman who understood that being listened to was the thing most people wanted most. She mentioned Jake twice, briefly, in ways that seemed designed to demonstrate that she wasn't there to talk about Jake. She said he was managing. She said he'd gotten some help. She moved quickly past both mentions, which should have told me something. My father joined us for the second hour. He arrived with the careful posture of a man who had been coached, or who had coached himself. And he was also warm and also asked questions. and was also attentive in the specific way of someone performing attentiveness rather than producing it naturally. But I could not have said, under cross-examination, that the performance was insincere. I wanted to believe them. I want to say clearly that this was not stupidity. Wanting to believe your parents have changed after 2 years of grief and rebuilding is not stupidity. It is the most human thing I know. The child inside the adult who has spent their life trying to earn something is still there, still listening, still capable of hearing "I miss you" and producing hope from it like blood from a wound. I told them I'd like to see them again. My mother's face, when I said this, was entirely real in a way that made the next part worse. We met twice more in the following 3 weeks. Dinners going well. A version of my parents I had not experienced before, or perhaps had experienced in early childhood, before Jake's needs became the family's organizing principle, before the emergency protocols became permanent. On the 3rd meeting, my father said, "Can we talk about where things stand with Jake?" The restaurant noise continued around us. I set down my fork. "Where do they stand?" I said. My father looked at my mother. My mother looked at the table. "He's in some difficulty," my father said. "What kind of difficulty?" "Financial," my mother said. "There's a situation with," she paused. "He made some decisions he's been trying to manage on his own, but it's gotten." "How much?" I said. Neither of them answered immediately. "How much?" I said again. "Emily," my mother said. "We know what we're asking. We understand it's not, we just don't know who else to turn to. We've exhausted what we have. We've been trying for 2 years to." 2 years, I said. "Yes, the 2 years I wasn't here." "Emily, what did you try before calling me?" I said. "What changed?" A pause. "We tried to handle it ourselves," my father said. "But Jake kept creating problems. The situation is more complicated than." "What changed in the last 2 years?" They looked at each other. "We learned some things," my father said, "about what he'd been, about the extent of it. We didn't understand before." "You didn't understand," I said, "because I was handling it. Every time it escalated, I absorbed it before you had to see it clearly." The sentence arrived fully formed, which meant it had been waiting. "I wasn't causing the family problems. I was covering them. And when I stopped, you finally had to look at what was actually there." My mother started to say something. "You didn't call because you missed me," I said. She stopped. The restaurant continued. Someone at the table beside us laughed at something. A server moved past with a tray. My mother did not deny it. That was somehow the thing that hurt most. Not the ask, not the manipulation which I had prepared for and could defend against, but the silence that followed, the not denying, which confirmed that I had named the thing accurately, and she had decided that confirmation was less costly than further pretense. "I did miss you," she said finally, quietly. "That part was true, but that's not why you called." She looked at me. Her expression, stripped of performance, was something I had rarely seen. Tired and honest about being tired, and perhaps in some small way ashamed, though shame for Linda Parker was a complicated country, and I was not sure she had full citizenship. "I knew you'd help," she said. "You've always helped," I said. "Yes. It's not wrong to ask family." "You didn't ask me," I said. "You prepared me. Weeks of dinners and warmth, and I miss my daughters, and then you asked." "That's not asking, that's a setup." My father looked at the table. "I'm not doing it," I said. "I want you to hear me say that clearly without any ambiguity. I'm not helping Jake with another debt. I'm not covering another crisis. I'm not being the solution to a problem he created." "Emily, I want to have a relationship with you," I said. "I have thought about that every day for 2 years. I have grieved the family I wanted. I have spent time trying to understand what you are and what you aren't, and I have come to terms with the difference." I looked at them both. "But I am not the family's safety net. I'm not the person Jake's bills go to when there's nowhere else. I'm not the one whose life gets restructured every time his falls apart." "Family should help each other," my mother said. It came out quietly. Not as a weapon this time, more like a reflex. The last line of a script that had always worked before. "Family," I said, "isn't supposed to sacrifice one person to save another, over and over, indefinitely, without acknowledgement." My father made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "That's what you built," I said. "A family where one person sacrificed so the other one didn't have to learn, and I participated in it for 30 years because I thought it was love. Because I thought if I was useful enough, capable enough, responsible enough, eventually the love would be." I stopped. "It doesn't matter. I understand now what the arrangement actually was." We stayed at the table for another 10 minutes. The conversation did not recover. There was nothing to recover it with, no argument that could reframe what had been named clearly. No warmth that could unsay the silence that had followed asterisk you didn't call because you missed me. My mother paid for dinner. At the door, she hugged me. I let her. The perfume was the same. "I do love you," she said into my shoulder. "I know," I said. And I think it was true, in the way that it was always true, in the insufficient, real, particular way that my mother loved the children she had organized her family around taking from me. "I love you too." I drove home. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table where 2 months earlier I had answered a phone call and briefly imagined a version of my family that had finally become something different. I thought about what it had felt like, those weeks of dinners, to have something I had wanted for a long time and to feel it being real. I let myself feel the grief of that, which was genuine and which I had earned. Then I thought about the pottery class, about Daniel, about Dr. Ockhaffer's office, and the question she had asked me in January, and the number I had calculated, about what 2 years of not being extracted from had allowed to grow. I thought about all of this, and I found that the grief, real as it was, did not outweigh it. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening, I was having dinner with Nadia and 2 of her friends, a couple who lived in her building, easy people, people with no knowledge of or investment in the Parker family. And we were eating pasta and drinking wine and arguing about something inconsequential and wonderful, the kind of argument that exists entirely for the pleasure of the argument. My phone buzzed on the table. "Mom." I looked at the screen. Nadia saw me look. She raised an eyebrow. I picked up the phone, turned the screen down, and put it back on the table. Then I looked at Nadia. "You were saying," I said, "something completely wrong about the movie." She laughed, the others laughed. The argument resumed. Across the table, my phone buzzed once more and then went still. I did not check it until I was home 2 hours later. It was a voicemail. I played it once. My mother's voice asking me to call back. No context given. I did not call back. I made tea. I went to bed. I lay in the dark of my apartment, the one I had leased and furnished and made quiet in the way of a person whose space is finally entirely their own. And I thought about the call. I thought about what it probably was. Another crisis, another debt, another emergency that had landed first on my mother's shoulders and then, inevitably, in my voicemail. Another version of the same request wearing a different season's clothing. I thought about what it would have cost me once to let it ring. I thought about what it cost me now. The difference was significant. Not painless. I want to resist the version of this story where the ending is simple. There was still a part of me that heard my mother's voice and produced something that wasn't nothing. There probably always would be. She was my mother. This was, in its way, permanent. But a part of me producing something was not the same as that something requiring an action. I was 35 years old. I was tired. I was also, for the first time in my adult life, genuinely rested in the way that requires you to stop spending energy you weren't aware you were spending. And I had learned in 2 years of careful reconstruction that rest was not a reward you received after finishing. It was a choice you made, repeatedly, against the accumulated weight of a family that had organized itself around the belief that you were endlessly available. Someone else's emergency was not my emergency. Not anymore. I put the phone on the nightstand. I closed my eyes. Outside, the street was ordinary and quiet, doing what streets do at midnight, carrying the soft, ambient sounds of a city that does not require anything of me. I slept, and in the morning, I did not call back. And in the morning, the world was entirely unchanged. And that, I had finally learned, was not a failure. It was the point.